I never knew.
She accidentally left a love letter packed with steamy fantasies on her millionaire boss's desk. By the time she came back, he had read every single word. All Sienna Vale had was a career hanging by a thread, an impossible crush, and enough shame to want to disappear. That same week, Ronan Ashford read the one thing she would never let anyone see. The letter was a mistake. Staying close to him was a far worse choice, because instead of pretending nothing had happened, Ronan started looking at her, as if every word was still burned into his memory. And when the truth hidden behind that desire finally surfaced, the humiliation of the letter would be the least of their worries.
Hi, I'm Rowan. A special shout-out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted.
Chapter 1: Cheap Wine and Terrible Ideas. The creative division's meeting room smelled like reheated coffee and expensive perfume, and Sienna Vale, hunched behind her own laptop, thought that was exactly what institutional humiliation smelled like. Pierce Mallory stood at the head of the table, thin smile, flawless tie, and had just projected onto the screen a snippet of an email she had sent by mistake, with the wrong attachment, 3 hours earlier. "Oh, it's not desperation, folks," Pierce remarked, in that oily voice of someone faking pity. "It's just an administrative curiosity. Our dear Sienna, 3 years with the company, still confuses the campaign attachment with HR's list of birthdays." Polite little chuckles rippled across the whole floor. Sienna felt her face burn and bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to reorganize the shame into pain. It was an old trick, taught by her own nervous system after countless stumbles. It hurt less when her mouth had a concrete reason to tremble. She lifted her chin, because lifting her chin was the only elegant move she knew, and tried for the smile of someone at peace with the joke. The air conditioning hummed softly above her, cold on her shoulders, and the cold light of the screen painted half the table a clinical blue. "I did mix them up," she admitted, in a tone steadier than she expected. Although the campaign attachment was delivered ahead of schedule, Pierce, in case anyone wants to check. Pierce blinked quickly. It lasted a fraction of a second, but Sienna noticed, because she always noticed those tiny lapses on other people's faces. That was the advantage of someone who spent her life on the defensive. He recomposed the smile and changed the subject before anyone could investigate her remark. The meeting ended soon after. Sienna gathered her papers with the false calm of someone who has just survived a hurricane and pretended not to notice the glances sliding down her back in the hallway. Down at the end of the floor, behind the frosted glass of the executive office, there was a tall silhouette, still, broad shoulders against the grey light of the window. Ronan Ashford. He didn't move as she passed. Maybe he hadn't even seen her. Maybe he had seen her and had the decency not to witness it. Sienna rode the elevator down, clutching the strap of her bag against her chest like a parachute harness. The lobby of Ashford & Cole gleamed in marble and steel, reflecting the rain hammering downtown Boston. Outside, the world was soaked, and so was she. The subway came packed, with the dense smell of wet jackets and collective exhaustion. Sienna held onto the rail and looked through the dark window of the car, watching her own blurry reflection against the tunnel. 25 years old, 3 years with the company, a resume full of good ideas that had never been signed with her name, and a foolish crush on a man who probably didn't even know what floor she worked on. It wasn't a clean crush. It was a private chaos, the kind she hid behind folders, and that showed itself in small daily tragedies, forgetting what she was saying when Ronan walked by, spilling coffee when he stepped into the elevator, and that one time she'd replied, "Love you too," to a vendor who had only written, "Awaiting your response." That message still haunted her sleep on some nights. The apartment was small and smelled like laundry waiting to be folded. Sienna dropped her bag on the kitchen floor, kicked off her shoes along the way, and was about to surrender to the slow dignity of packet soup when the doorbell rang the way only one familiar person rang it, 3 times in a row. No patience. Wren Keller came in shaking her umbrella against the doorframe, bringing with her the smell of wet asphalt and cheap vanilla perfume. "I heard about the public humiliation 20 minutes after it happened," she announced. raising 2 bottles like trophies. Grocery store wine. The label looks like veterinary medicine. I brought 2 because one would be insufficient for the size of the disaster. You're a terrible friend, Sienna muttered, stepping aside. I'm the best friend. The terrible one is the other girl, the one you never invited out again because she's dating a realtor. Ren was in the creative division too, no filter whatsoever, full of comments that always arrived 5 minutes before the right moment. She had brown hair in an uneven cut, permanent lipstick, and the rare ability to make Sienna laugh at her own misery. They settled at the little kitchen table, which was also a desk, a dining table, and, in extreme cases, an improvised ironing board. Ren opened the wine with the expertise of someone who'd been doing it for years and poured it into 2 mugs, because none of the glasses were clean. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." Sienna told her. The meeting, the attachment, the screen, Pierce's slick smile. Ren listened with the tight face of someone silently plotting a murder. "That man is a skin rash with a tie," she pronounced. "And Ashford. Was he there?" "He was on the floor. And nothing." Sienna spun the mug between her hands, feeling the fragile warmth of the wine against the chipped porcelain. "Why would he do anything? He doesn't see me, Ren. I'm part of the furniture, with eyes." Ren replied, in a tone that carried the opposite conviction. "The furniture theory has holes, but fine, let's pretend it doesn't." The rain thickened against the window. Sienna poured more wine. The second cup came sweeter than the first, and the third came with laughter. And somewhere between the third and the fourth, Ren raised her mug as if toasting a universal truth. "You know what I think, Vale. Writing cleanses the soul. Grab a sheet of paper, pour it all out, burn it afterward. Works better than therapy, it's cheaper, and nobody has to know. You are literally the worst advisor in existence." "And even so," Ren yawned, stretching in her chair, "I'm the only one who showed up in the rain." A little while later, she left, leaving Sienna in a kitchen smelling of bad wine and a comfortable silence. The rain was now falling more slowly, in a rhythm that resembled badly played music. Sienna stood in front of the table, looking at the notebook she had bought months ago to get her life organized, and had never opened. The cover was blue, the pages untouched, with that faint smell of new paper that always promised more than it delivered. She sat down, opened to the first page, picked up the pen. She thought she was going to write anger. She thought she was going to write Pierce, and the screen, and the disgusting feeling of being ridiculed by a man who was worth less than the shoe she had almost hurled at him in her mind. But the pen met the paper, and what came out wasn't anger. It was something else. It was the thing buried beneath the anger, the thing the anger had always covered to protect her. "Dear impossible boss," Sienna stopped. She looked at the sentence. She let out a strange laugh, alone in the kitchen, listening to the echo of her own sound die against the cabinets. She should have torn the page out right then. She didn't. She set the pen down again, and her heart beat a little louder, as if it knew, before she did, that this wouldn't end well. She wrote about his voice, which dropped an octave when he was tired. She wrote about his hands, and how they rested on the table during meetings, long calm as if they needed no one. She wrote about the way he had of taking off his glasses when he was annoyed, with a controlled precision that seemed more like a threat than a gesture. She wrote about how he walked like a man who had never been interrupted in his life, and about how she, on the contrary, was interrupted all the time, including by her own thoughts. She wrote, somewhere near the beginning, that she knew this was the kind of thing you write at 3 in the morning with bad wine, and she kept writing anyway. She wrote about what she would do if Ronan Ashford spent a single night, by mistake, in her apartment, about what she would dare to say, about what she would dare to ask, about fantasies with the contours of skin and the smell of rain, the kind that, if she reread them in the morning, would make her want to be swallowed by the plumbing. The pen ran across 4 whole pages. The sentences grew more frantic, more intimate, more ridiculous. At some point, near the end, before she had the courage to stop, she wrote the sentence that weighed more than all the others. "I know you would never look at me as a woman, because I'm just the messy employee everyone tolerates." Sienna reread the sentence slowly. She felt the wine go down a little colder this time, and a kind of tightness in her chest, as if she had just confessed something to a priest who would never forgive her. She folded the pages into 4 with the delicacy of someone who has just signed a confession. She told herself, out loud, that she was going to burn it, that she was going to burn it before dawn, that she was going to strike a match over the sink and watch the paper turn to little grey smoke. And then she was going to sleep like a person who had not just written a legally incriminating document about her own boss. Before dawn, she repeated, pointing her finger at the letter as if threatening a small animal. I swear on my emotional integrity, what's left of it. The emotional integrity did not respond. The rain did. It thickened again, against the window, a hypnotic sound of domestic apocalypse. Sienna rested her chin on her arms crossed over the table, just for a minute, just to rest her eyes. She swore, closing them against the yellow light of the kitchen lamp. The mug tipped gently, leaving a dark circle of wine that crept slowly across the old wood. The notebook stayed open. The folded letter rested beside her elbow, on the exact line where sleep met exhaustion. Outside, the city stayed wet. The microwave clock read 2:11, then 2:30, then 3. Sienna did not wake up. Chapter 2, Dear Impossible Boss. The alarm went off 3 times before Sienna understood that the sound came from the real world and not from a nightmare administered by Pierce Mallory. She opened one eye, then the other, and the grey light of a Boston morning came through the window with the delicacy of a punch. The notebook was still open on the kitchen table, the pen lying across the pages like a tired witness, and there was a reddish mark on her cheek in the exact shape of the metal spiral. It took 3 seconds for the memory of the night before to hit. Cheap wine, rain, Ren, the fateful line about cleansing the soul, and the letter she had sworn to burn before dawn, and which was still there, intact, the ink dry and the shame very much alive inside every word. Sienna looked at the oven clock, closed her eyes, opened them again. The number hadn't improved. She was late. Late in a way that left no room for breakfast, a decent shower or checking papers. The presentation would start at 9, and the trip to Ashford and Cole, with the subway delayed by the previous day's rain, would take 40 minutes of pure faith. She tried to pin up her bun without the help of a mirror and rushed around the apartment gathering what she could: bag, blazer, left shoe, right shoe from under the couch, phone, folders, the folders. The stack of reports was there, on the table, beside the open notebook. She grabbed it all at once, without checking, and shoved it into her bag with the delicacy of someone throwing out trash. Somewhere between the couch and the door, a folded sheet, torn from the notebook in the early hours for reasons she'd rather forget, slid into the stack as if it had always belonged there. Sienna didn't see it. Sienna never saw it. On the subway, leaning against the bar, she mentally rehearsed the presentation, while pretending the hangover was just accumulated exhaustion. She knew where Pierce would try to break in. She knew where Ronan would demand precision. She knew that if she could get through the first 5 minutes without dropping liquid on someone important, she might survive the morning. The Ashford and Cole lobby greeted her with that smell of polished marble and expensive perfume, designed to make people like her doubt their own right to breathe there. Sienna went through the turnstile, ran up to the creative floor, threw her bag onto her desk and sorted the reports into a quick stacky, without reading a single header. Ren flew past behind her and said, in a whisper that contained more energy than the machine coffee, "You look like someone who slept on top of a bad decision." "I slept on top of a bad decision," Sienna replied, without slowing down. "But I left the bad decision at home. Don't bring it into the conversation right now." Ren raised her hands in theatrical surrender and disappeared between the cubicles. Sienna took a deep breath, straightened the blazer crumpled by an invisible hurricane, and went up to the executive office with the stack pressed against her chest. The room was full. Pierce was already settling into the chair on the right, with the confidence of a man who considered the place a blood inheritance. The other directors talked in low tones, water glasses, open folders, calendars blinking. At the head, leaning back in his chair as if the world had to wait for his signal, was Ronan Ashford. A flawless white shirt, fine-rimmed glasses, an expression that said nothing, and precisely for that, said everything. He looked at her when she came in. It was a second, but the look weighed like a whole sentence. Sienna began the presentation trying to remember that breathing was an automatic function of the body. Pierce interrupted her on the second slide with a question whose answer was on the next slide. She answered. Pierce interrupted her on the fourth slide with a comment about fragile methodology. That meant nothing beyond throwing off her rhythm. Ronan lifted 2 fingers off the table. Pierce swallowed the rest of his sentence as if he'd bitten his tongue. The third interruption came on the 7th slide. Pierce smiled at the table, glanced sidelong at Ronan, and asked whether the creative assistant had checked the data herself or had passed it along to someone with more experience. The silence lasted long enough for Sienna to feel her heart drop to her heels. Ronan did not raise his voice. He simply set the pen down on the table, slowly, and said, "She checked it. Go on, Sienna." It was the first time in 3 years that he'd called her by her first name in a meeting. Sienna didn't know whether she wanted to cry or thank the ceiling. She went on. She finished. She received discreet nods from the directors, a protocol handshake from Pierce, and the feeling of having crossed a minefield in sandals. At the end, while gathering her papers with the haste of someone who wanted to vanish before anyone struck up a conversation, she left 2 folders on Ronan's desk. She left the room, went down to the creative floor, dropped into her chair, and breathed for the first time in 40 minutes. It was 5 minutes later that she looked at her bag, opened the zipper to check, and froze. The folded sheet wasn't there. Sienna felt the blood leave her face so completely that Wren, 3 cubicles down, lifted her head and asked whether she had seen a ghost. She didn't answer. She stood up, still staring at the bag as if the sheet might reappear by the sheer force of dread, and headed down the hallway, walking fast, then very fast, then running. She took the stairs because the elevator would be too slow for the level of catastrophe announcing itself. She went up 2 floors, crossed the executive hallway past the secretary, who lifted her head with the polished expression of someone who senses something is wrong but won't comment, and walked into Ronan's office without knocking. Her bun had come undone, his glasses on the desk, his hands on the paper. The sheet was there. Open. Read. Sienna stopped in the middle of the room. The air stopped with her. Ronan raised his eyes without hurry, lifted his left eyebrow to the exact degree of a man about to commit a cruel act with elegance, and said, in the calmest voice she had ever heard come out of a human being, "Dear impossible boss. No. I know this is the kind of thing you write at 3 in the morning with bad wine. Ronan." So the wine was bad. Good to know. Sienna let out a sound that belonged to no known language, crossed the room in 2 strides and tried to snatch the paper from his hand. Ronan, far too tall for the size of her desperation, raised his arm above his head with the calm of a man holding car keys away from a tantruming child. She jumped. He kept reading. "You take off your glasses when you're annoyed, and I don't know if that's a gesture or a sentence. I'm going to jump out that window," Sienna announced, in cinematic panic, gesturing at the glass behind him. "I'm going to jump, and no one will sue me because it was my choice. It was conscious, and I'll leave a note thanking Boston. There's no window that opens on this floor. Then I quit. I resign from modern society. I'm going to open a bakery in Alaska. I'm going to make rye bread. I'm going to raise a goat." "A goat. A goat, Ronan." He laughed. It wasn't the millimeter-precise smile she had seen at corporate cocktail parties, the one that looked more like a diplomatic concession. It was a real laugh, low, surprised by itself, as if it had escaped before he had time to hold it back. Sienna stood frozen for a second, forgetting the paper, the dread, and the bakery in Alaska, because it was the first time in 3 years that she had heard that sound come from him. It was a strategic error. Ronan seized her second of paralysis and went on, "Though you walk as if you'd never been interrupted in your life, and I'm the kind of person who apologizes even to automatic doors." "I do," she admitted, quietly, defeated. "I know you would never look at me as a woman." His voice slowed. Sienna noticed even before he finished the sentence. Ronan read the rest without irony, without theater, with the exact intonation of someone testing whether each word wounds the air before it lands, "because I'm just the messy employee everyone tolerates." The silence in the room was different from before. It wasn't the silence of embarrassment. It was a denser silence, the kind that sinks a few centimeters into the chest and stays there. Sienna looked at her own shoes that didn't match, one light brown, the other dark brown, a late discovery from the morning's rush. At any other moment she would have laughed. Ronan was no longer smiling. He folded the letter carefully, slowly, aligning the edges, as if the paper were a legal document that needed to survive the next decade. He set the sheet down on the desk, his palm over it for an instant, like someone closing a door without a sound. He stood up, came around the desk, stopped in front of her. Sienna stepped back half a step on instinct, bumped into the armchair, realized she was cornered between the expensive upholstery and his presence, and gave up pretending she had control over anything in that room. "Sienna," he said, and the way her name sounded in his mouth made her lift her eyes. "Look at me." She looked. His eyes were closer than she had permission to receive. There was no more irony. There was a stillness so unmoving that she almost preferred the sarcasm. "Who is it that makes you feel so small?" The question dropped into the middle of the room as if it had physical weight. Sienna opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The honest answers were so many. Pierce, 3 years of creative assistant in air quotes on her badge, a whole life of apologizing for her own existence, herself most of the time, that none of them managed to come out first. She wanted to answer with a joke. She knew she needed to. It was what had always worked. The joke didn't come. Instead, her eyes filled with tears without warning, and she hated her own body with a clean intensity for betraying the facade right there, right in front of him. Sienna looked away, laughed awkwardly, ran a hand along the corner of her eye with a gesture that tried to seem casual and failed. "Could you please," she said in the steadiest voice she could gather, which still came out trembling, "give me back the letter so I can arrange the bonfire it has deserved since last night?" Ronan didn't move. He looked at her for another second, the kind that seems to have room for a whole lifetime of decisions inside it. Then, without looking away, he reached back, took the folded letter from the desk, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "No," he replied, Carlis without theatre. "This letter is mine now." "Ronan, and you still haven't answered my question." Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The undone bun slid another centimeter down the side of her head. The mismatched shoes looked up at her with a silent irony, and the coldest man at Ashford and Cole, standing in front of her, with her letter tucked over his heart, waited for an answer she still didn't know how to give. Chapter 3: The Crooked Door of Truth. The first thing Sienna did on leaving the office was nearly knock over the executive floor's secretary. She apologized to a potted plant. She crossed the hallway with her hand over her mouth, as if holding her face there would keep it from coming apart in the middle of the expensive carpet. The bun, already lost, came undone for good when she reached the women's restroom on the mezzanine. She locked the stall door and pressed her forehead against the cold metal. It was unfair that a piece of metal held the weight of shame better than she herself could. She stayed there long enough to hear 2 women come in, talk about the weather, and leave. She waited a little longer, just to be safe. When she finally opened the stall door, the mirror gave back a version of her that looked like she'd survived a small house fire. Red eyes, strands stuck to her face, blouse crumpled at the waist. Sienna took a deep breath and tried to put back together what could be put back together, which wasn't much. The creative floor's cafeteria was the safest place in the building for someone who wanted to disappear without leaving. It had wooden booths, the aroma of strong coffee that smothered any thought, and Wren Keller, who by that hour was already seated in her usual corner, fiddling with her phone with the expression of someone who knew exactly what had happened without needing to ask. "Sit," Wren said without looking up, "and don't cry here, because the cafeteria manager already gave me a lecture this week about bad energy in the establishment." Sienna sat. She placed both hands on the table, as if she needed something concrete to anchor herself. "He read it," she murmured. "I know." "How do you know?" "Rumors travel faster than email in this company." Wren finally lifted her gaze, with that unique mix of pity and amusement that only a best friend can sustain without offending. "All of it." He read it. "Like all of it." "Out loud." Ren let out a sound that didn't quite become a laugh, but wasn't pure solidarity either. It was the sound you make when someone else's tragedy is too big to fit into a single reaction. "Honey," she said after a moment, "as your friend, I feel I have to offer you a ride to the airport. If the Alaska bakery plan is serious for real, I'm on board. I can even cover your shift until you save up for the ticket. There won't be a ticket if I don't go back to my desk. Are you going back to your desk? I don't know." The cup Ren pushed toward her had black coffee, no sugar. And it was exactly the kind of gesture Sienna needed without having asked. She took a sip. It burned her tongue. She thought it was fair. "He asked me something," she confessed, in a lower voice. "At the end, when he got to the part I wished didn't exist." Ren raised an eyebrow. "What part?" "The one about the messy employee everyone tolerates." "Ah," her friend set the phone down. "That part. He asked who makes me feel that way." "And did you answer?" "I ran off." Ren considered that for a second. Then she raised her cup as if making a somber toast. "Very on brand for you," she remarked. "Impeccable narrative consistency." Sienna laughed, and the laugh came out half broken, half grateful. That was how Ren worked. She didn't try to fix anything. She just offered company for the disaster. Somewhere between the second sip of coffee and the third, Sienna felt her heart return to a more or less normal rhythm. That was exactly when Silas Aldrich appeared in the cafeteria doorway. Ronan's chief of staff was a tall, thin man, always in shades of grey suits, with the kind of expression that seemed to have been carefully emptied out by training. He crossed the room slowly, stopped beside the table, and looked at Sienna like someone delivering a summons without ceremony. "Miss Vale," he said in a neutral tone, "he's asked to see you. Now. Preferably before you have time to change countries." Ren choked on her coffee. Silas didn't move a muscle of his face, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that could, under very specific lighting conditions, be interpreted as half a smile. Sienna stood up, smoothed her blouse, tried to pin up her hair, gave up halfway, let it fall. Ronan's office had the door ajar. Silas indicated the way with a gesture and stayed behind, closing the glass behind her with the discretion of someone who had done this many times in his life. Ronan was standing by the window. The Boston sky at that hour of the afternoon was a purplish grey, and he seemed part of the frame, jacket still buttoned, hands in his pockets, an impossible posture. When he turned, there was no more playfulness on his face. There was something harder to name. "Sienna," he said, and the name came out of his mouth like a conscious choice. "Ronan," she replied, and the first name came out steadier than she expected. Maybe because it had already escaped once, in a panic, in his office. He pointed to the chair in front of the desk. Sienna sat. His jacket was draped over the back of the leather chair on the other side, and it was impossible not to think about what was probably still folded in the inner pocket. "I'm not going to bring it up," Ronan said, sitting back down. "Silas, not now." "Okay. I want to talk about the new creative division project. You presented 3 concepts last quarter. I want to hear the second one." Sienna blinked. "The second one?" "The one with the campaign integrated with the finance department. The one no one approved." She was silent for a second, trying to reorganize her brain. Talking about work was strangely the last terrain she'd expected to find in that office. "So I say that one. Because I don't believe no one truly approved of it." It was a discreet punch. Sienna opened her mental folder, began to explain, slowly at first, then more firmly, as what she was saying started to make sense again in her own mouth. Ronan listened without interrupting. He took no notes. He simply watched. Every so often he moved his chin in a minimal, "Go on." When she finished, he nodded once. "Good," he concluded. "Very good. Thank you." Sienna stood up. She already had her hand on the doorknob when his voice reached her again, unhurried. "You didn't answer my question 4 hours ago." She stopped. She didn't turn around. "I know." "I'll wait." That was all. She left the office without saying anything more, and the sentence hung at her back like a promise. Over the weekend, she didn't sleep well. On Monday morning, she found out why. The email circulated on the creative floor at 11 o'clock. An attachment with the finished presentation for the partners, pretty slides, clean charts, all signed by Pierce Mallory, all of it, from the first line to the last, written by her 3 months earlier. Sienna read it twice to make sure she wasn't going crazy. She wasn't. She found Pierce in the hallway between his office and the elevator. "You used my project?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Pierce stopped. He turned slowly. He was a middle-aged man who dressed too expensively for the facial expression he had. "Sienna," he replied, with the smile of a man offering an umbrella in the middle of a hurricane. "Let's not overdo it. It literally has my name on 3 versions of the drafts I sent you in February. It has my name on the final version, which is the only one that matters." She felt the blood rise to her scalp. "You know this is theft. I know you're an assistant." His voice dropped, grew slower, more pedagogical, and for that very reason more dangerous. "And I know no one in this company is going to believe that a clumsy assistant produced a project of this scale on her own. You want to move up, Sienna? This isn't the way. The way is to stay quiet." "And if I don't?" Pierce tilted his head a little, as if the question were cute. "Then I remind the board of every confusing email, every wrong attachment, every time you replied, 'Love you too,' to a vendor." He took a step forward. "Your entire career at this company fits in the palm of my hand. Think carefully before you make me close that palm." Sienna stood still. She couldn't respond right away. Pierce smiled again, gave her shoulder a light pat as if they were old colleagues, and headed for the elevator. She waited for him to disappear. Then she leaned against the wall and breathed. The rest of the day passed in a fog. When the workday ended, she was gathering her things to leave when a message popped up on her phone. "1 drink, not as your boss, bar on the south corner, 7 p.m. RI." Sienna read it 3 times. She answered before her good sense returned. The bar was discreet, dark in the right way, with wooden booths and an old jukebox no one used. Ronan was seated in the back, without his jacket for the first time, his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow. She tried not to look at his forearms. She looked. She sat across from him. "Wine?" he asked. "Please," he ordered. He didn't ask big questions right away. He talked about the weather, about a new restaurant, about the book that had been in her car the week before. Sienna relaxed without realizing it. By the time she noticed, she was already telling him, in short sentences, about Pierce, about the project, about the threat in the hallway. Ronan listened without interrupting. His hand on the table was very close to hers, so close that the tip of his thumb touched Sienna's wrist once, lightly, and she forgot how to breathe. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, in a low voice. "Because I thought it would sound like whining." "It's not whining." "I know. Now." He leaned forward a little. The distance between their 2 faces shrank in a way that had nothing to do with the bar, and everything to do with the way she felt the air come in and out. His hand rose, slowly, until it almost touched her cheek. His phone buzzed on the table. Once, twice, 3 times. Ronan glanced at it, and his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before relaxing again. He answered. He said, "Not now," in a tone Sienna had never heard, hung up, put the phone in his pocket. He turned back to her. This time his hand didn't return to the air. "Sienna," he said, "I have an idea, but I need you to trust me for 48 hours. Chapter 4. New Blood in the Water. Sienna spent the first hour of the next morning standing in the middle of her own apartment, staring at a stack of folders as if they were a wild animal about to pounce. 48 hours. He had said 48 hours. He hadn't said what she was supposed to do with them, and that, in some sense, was worse than a clear instruction. A clear instruction she would know how to carry out with her usual nervous obedience. His silence, on the other hand, was an open space she didn't know how to cross without stumbling. She sat down, stood up, sat down again, made coffee, forgot the coffee on the counter, reappeared in the kitchen 40 minutes later, found a cold white ceramic cup and considered that a metaphor. The grey light came through the window in thin slices, hit the tabletop, and lit up a crumb of toast forgotten from the day before. Sienna ran her thumb along the rim of the cup, felt the cold travel under her nail, and had the exact impression of being watched by her own apartment. It was Ren who pulled her out of her paralysis, with a direct message that said only, "Stop freaking out and let me in." When she came into the apartment, her friend carried a cardboard folder under her arm and the expression of someone who had decided important things during the trip over. Her coat smelled of rain, and she balanced 2 coffees in thermal cups in her other hand, both with Sienna's name written wrong. "Strategy," she announced, planting the folder on the table with a dry thud. "If he asked you for 48 hours, it's because he wants room to move pieces. Your job is to hand him the artillery. Let's pull it all together." "All of what?" "Everything." Ren opened the folder and dumped out notebooks, notepads, crumpled post-its that fell in little colored avalanches onto the wood. Every email from Pierce asking you to get the slides ready. Every handwritten draft you made before meetings. Every digital file with a date and authorship. You're a chaotic assistant, Sienna, but you're a chaotic, organized assistant. "I know you." Sienna looked at her friend, with a sudden urge to cry that she had to swallow like ice water. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I've hated Pierce since the day he called the creative division the decorative department." Ren sat in the chair across from her, slipped off her sneakers under the table and opened her laptop with the intimacy of someone who had already lived there in her mind. "And because you deserve it. Stop looking at me with that face of emotional gratitude and open your email." They worked into the night, the next day too, with no real break, sleeping in short shifts on the couch. Sienna recovered emails from February she had archived on instinct months earlier, high-resolution screenshots she had saved in a paranoid folder in the cloud, old versions of documents with edit histories, notes in the margins of notebooks in her characteristic slanted handwriting. Ren handled the printing and indexing, while Sienna checked them one by one. They printed everything in 2 copies. They organized it in a folder with an index, colored dividers and date markings. When it was done, the folder had enough weight to be a verdict, and Sienna balanced it on both hands before closing it, like someone weighing her own courage. Ronan didn't show up, didn't send a message, didn't interfere. Sienna felt at some point on the second night, with her shoulder aching and the ceiling of her apartment higher than usual, that maybe that was the point. He was giving her the room to build her own ground. No one was going to walk into the meeting holding her hand. She was going to walk in holding evidence. On Wednesday morning, the official email arrived. Extraordinary board meeting. Main room. 9 sharp. Sienna chose a cream-colored blouse, black pants, low shoes. She combed her hair in front of the bathroom mirror, stopped halfway through the motion, and decided to leave it loose. She thought it was only fair to walk in as herself. No disguises, no tight bun, pretending to be authority. When she reached the executive floor, Pierce was already seated at the table, with that smile of a man who knew how the movie ended. He waved at her with false cordiality. "Good morning, Sienna. I didn't expect to see you here." "I know." She sat. She placed the folder on her knees. The leather of the chair creaked low, a sound that would normally have made her smile in embarrassment, and that, on that morning, she ignored. The board members came in one by one, dark suit, grey suit, a woman in a skirt suit, fine-rimmed glasses, the discreet smell of expensive perfume mixed with that of the huge table's waxed wood. Silas took his usual spot near the wall. Last, Ronan. He crossed the room without hurry, took the head seat, waited for everyone to settle. "Good morning," he said, in a neutral tone. "Today's agenda has only one item. The creative division will present first." Pierce raised his hand. "Mr. Ashford, if I may, I had prepared a summary of what I presented to the partners last week and—" "The creative division first," Ronan repeated, without raising his voice. It was as if a door had closed somewhere on the floor. Pierce opened his mouth. No sound came out. Sienna stood up. She walked to the end of the table, feeling each step in the thick carpet. She opened the folder. Her voice trembled on the first sentence, not on the second. She showed the files with dates and authorship. She showed the handwritten drafts, with her writing in the margin in blue pen. She showed the emails from Pierce asking her to get the slides ready, man, for presentations that later carried his name. She showed 3 years of small and medium projects, attributed to other people, always with the digital trail pointing to the same computer. Hers. She didn't accuse anyone with an adjective. She let the documents speak. Pierce tried to interrupt twice. The first time, Ronan raised just one finger, and the sound stopped in his throat. The second time, he was more direct. Pierce, wait your turn. This kind of accusation against a finance director, I said wait. It was the first time Sienna heard Ronan use that tone in a room with more than 2 people. Pierce swallowed the rest of his sentence as if it were glass. When she finished, she closed the folder. She sat. No one spoke for a moment. The woman in the skirt suit was the first to move. She took one of the copies of the documents and began to leaf through it slowly, the rustle of pages the only sound in the room. The other members followed. The silence, this time, wasn't humiliating. It was just weight, and the weight was on the right side of the table. Ronan rose. As of today, the creative division becomes an autonomous division of Ashford & Cole, he announced. See creative director Sienna Vale. There was a murmur. Sienna felt the blood rise, but not toward embarrassment this time, toward somewhere higher, around her temples, with that light vertigo that feels like free fall in reverse. As for Mr. Mallory, Ronan continued, without turning his head toward Pierce, his duties are terminated, effective immediately. Silas will accompany him to his office to collect his personal belongings. Legal will be in touch regarding the documents. Pierce went pale. Mr. Ashford, this is what took far too long to happen. Ronan finally looked at him. His glasses were on the table. He picked them up, folded the temples with that controlled precision of his A, and tucked them into the inner pocket of his jacket. Good luck with your next career. Silas approached Pierce's chair with his trained expression. Pierce stood. He left the room in silence, like a man who still didn't believe he had lost. The meeting ended soon after. The board members left, shaking Sienna's hand on the way out, one by one. The woman in the skirt suit held her hand a second longer and said, "Congratulations," in a dry tone that was, in that environment, the equivalent of a tight hug. When the room emptied, Ronan was still standing at the head of the table. Sienna was still on her feet, the folder in her hands, not knowing what to do with her own body. The morning light fell at an angle on the glass wall, marking a bright stripe on the carpet between the two of them. "You did well," he said. I trembled. "Only at the start. After that, no." She breathed. She let out a short laugh. Of relief, the kind that comes more from the mouth than the lungs. "Thank you. It wasn't me. It was, in part. A very small part." He stepped down from the head of the table and stopped a step away, close enough for her to catch the discreet scent of his cologne, something woody and dry. "The big part was yours." Sienna looked at the floor. She looked at him again. "You didn't tell me what was going to happen. If I had, you would have walked in to defend what I ordered." "I wanted you to walk in to defend what was yours." It was a sentence that could have been cold. It wasn't. She stood for a moment, not knowing how to respond, her mouth half open and the feeling that something inside her had been named out loud for the first time. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said, and it wasn't a question. "As my boss?" "No." She nodded before her good sense had a chance to weigh in. The restaurant in Beacon Hill was small, hidden behind a wooden door with no sign. Tables with heavy cloths, real candles that trembled at the slightest breath. A maitre d', who greeted Ronan by his first name without ceremony. The smell of melted butter, fresh rosemary, and a thread of hot smoke coming from the open kitchen in the back. Sienna sat at the corner table and tried not to think about the prices on the menu, folding the napkin over her lap with more attention than it deserved. He ordered for her and for himself. Deep-colored wine poured slowly. Small appetizers, arranged on the plate like little sculptures. Easy conversation, light about the board, about the project, about what she imagined for the new division. Ronan leaned slightly forward when she spoke, and that lean, minimal as it was the most dangerous thing at the table. When the second glass came, Sienna realized she still had something stuck in her throat for days. More than days. Years, maybe. She set the glass down. "Can I ask you something?" "You can." "Did you only come close to me out of pity or for fun?" Ronan was silent. To Sienna, it didn't seem like the embarrassed silence of someone caught. It seemed like the silence of someone weighing each word before letting it out. He set his glass down too, carefully, adjusting it a few millimeters to the left, as if the position mattered. He looked at her for a long moment, without looking away. "I started reading that letter as a provocation," he said in a low voice, almost hoarse. "It took me about 3 sentences to realize I couldn't stop anymore, and when I got to the part where you called yourself the messy employee everyone tolerates, I discovered something I hadn't noticed in 3 years." "What?" "That there was a whole woman in there. Funny, wounded, brave, hidden behind her own shame." Sienna felt her eyes sting, a sudden heat rising up her neck. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give herself that luxury in the middle of the dining room, with the candlelight flickering on his face across the table. "This isn't pity," he continued, "and it never was fun. You're not an interval in my routine, Sienna. You're the first thing in many years that came in and stayed." He stretched his hand across the table, palm up, open, waiting. With that stillness that was the loudest thing in the world, Sienna looked at his hand, at his face, at his hand again. Chapter 5, Power Outage. The morning after the dinner in Beacon Hill began with Sienna staring at the ceiling of her own bedroom, as if it were responsible for the decisions she still hadn't made. Her own hand, closing over Ronan's on the restaurant table the night before, was still there, somewhere between memory and her stomach, irritatingly real. She had said yes, and now she had to learn to live with the yes. The smell of last night's wine still seemed stuck to her fingertips, along with the odd feeling of having heard a sentence that was far too important without having known what to do with it. She chose a neutral blouse, changed, put on another, changed again. In the end, she left home late in the same white shirt she always wore when she needed to pretend she was in control. The hallway mirror gave back a version of her with sunken eyes and a half-smile that seemed to apologize for existing so early. In the creative floor's hallway, Wren intercepted her with 2 coffees and the smile of someone who'd been having fun for an hour already. The smell of the coffee was too strong, the kind the company served on days with important meetings. "Good morning, Director. Sleep well?" "I slept 5 minutes per hour, thanks." 5 minutes per hour is a very specific average. "It's a scientific average," Sienna replied, taking the cup. "Don't look at me like that. I'm looking the way I always look." "You're looking like you're selling tickets." Wren let out a low laugh and walked beside her to the division. Somewhere between the cubicles and the meeting room, Sienna crossed paths with Ronan in the hallway. He merely tilted his head, said "Good morning," as if the word weighed a ton, and walked on. Her bun nearly came undone from the sheer effort of not turning her face. His scent lingered in the hallway longer than was reasonable, something dry and citrusy underneath, discreet, the kind that arrives before the person and leaves after. "You went red," Wren remarked quietly. "I did not go red. You went the color of the company logo, Wren, which is red." Sienna raised her cup in a gesture of peaceful threat and walked into her own office. The workday dragged on with that strange quality of a day where everything seems important and nothing seems urgent. She answered messages, approved 3 visual pieces, received a bouquet of praise from the team about the new division, and heard, in the middle of the afternoon, that a storm was coming in from the coast. The sky, behind the windows, had already traded its blue for a heavy end-of-the-world grey. By around 6 in the evening, the wind was already beating against the windows as if it wanted to come in and complain about something. Sienna closed her laptop slowly. The idea was to take the elevator, go down, vanish home, and start breathing again tomorrow. Simple plan. Impossible plan. At 7 on the dot, she crossed the floor's interior lobby with her coat over her arm. She pressed the button. The elevator arrived empty. She got in. The doors began to close. A hand caught the edge. Ronan stepped in without hurry, leaned against the opposite wall, and pressed the ground floor button as if it were any ordinary gesture. Sienna felt the air in the elevator shrink. The side mirror gave back the image of the two of them standing there, one on each side, with a meter of space and 3 years of unspoken things in between. "Good evening," she said, in a thread of a voice. "Good evening." The elevator went down one floor, then another. Then, with an almost offensive politeness, it stopped. The main lights flickered twice and gave way to the emergency light, yellowish, weak, exactly the kind that seemed invented to make situations worse. Sienna looked at the panel, looked at the ceiling, looked anywhere that wasn't the man leaning against the opposite wall. "I swear," she muttered, "if this is a trap, I'm suing the building." "The power outage is general," he replied, in a voice far too calm for someone who should be bothered. "The storm took out 3 blocks. How do you know that?" "From the noise." "What noise?" "The silence of the ventilation system." She inhaled, let the air out through her nose, and leaned her back against the elevator wall, as if the wall could do something for her. The metal was cold through the thin fabric of her shirt, and the contrast with the heat of her own face was almost laughable. "Great. Wonderful. You're a human sensor. I, on the other hand, am a person about to collapse from involuntary proximity in an enclosed space." Ronan slowly turned his face to look at her. "Involuntary proximity. In an enclosed space. You're thinking of suing me?" "For emotional moral damages," she confirmed, adjusting her coat as if that made any difference. "I have a very strong case. Witnesses. Documented history. An entire letter." He laughed. It was a low laugh, almost hidden, but Sienna felt it in her spine as if someone had run a finger there without permission. "You're laughing at my legal suffering, Ronan." "I'm laughing at your thesis. The thesis is solid." "The thesis needs a lawyer. I have one," she pointed at herself. "It's me." "You're not a lawyer." "Technical detail." He pushed off the wall. It was only one step. Sienna felt the air in the elevator change temperature, as if someone had opened an invisible window. Ronan stopped 1/2 meter from her, hands in his pockets, his jacket crooked at the hem from a whole day of taking it off and putting it on. His tie had a loose knot, a rare thing on him. Sienna registered it as if it were a clue to some mystery she still didn't have permission to solve. "Sienna?" "Yes." "Do you want me to stop?" She looked at him. The yellow light cut his jaw in two, leaving half his face in shadow. Her heart beat in the wrong place in her chest. "Stop what?" "Looking at you like this." The question hung in the air of the elevator as if it had weight. Sienna opened her mouth to answer with a joke. She had a joke on the tip of her tongue, she always did, and the joke didn't come out. A single word came out, low, almost a breath. "No." He came closer. He didn't rush, didn't barge. He simply reduced the distance like someone closing a deal that had been in the drafting for months. His hand rose, touched her chin with his fingertips, and stopped. It waited. Sienna realized, with an inconvenient clarity, that he was waiting for her to be sure, and that he would wait however long it took. Sienna was the one who tilted her head first. She was the one who closed the last centimeter. She was the one who decided, right there, in the yellowish dark of an elevator that had chosen to die at the most inconvenient time of the year, that fear could wait until next week. The kiss started slow. Slow as if he were asking permission with every millimeter. Then urgent, when she pulled at the lapel of his jacket and discovered she had the strength to do that. Then slow again, when he drew his lips back just enough to press his forehead to hers and breathe as if breathing were a newly discovered luxury. His hand had moved to the nape of her neck, firm without being hard, as if afraid she might disappear in the middle of the gesture. For the first time, and he said, his voice lower than she'd heard in 3 years, "I lost control. Are you okay with that? I don't want to get it back." Sienna closed her eyes. She let out a short laugh, surprised at herself. "You talk as if this were an executive decision." "It is." "You're absurd." "I am." The elevator chose exactly that moment to decide to come back to life. The main lights flickered. The ventilation system resumed its hum. The doors opened with that offensive smoothness of someone who had pretended all along not to be listening. Ronan stepped back. He held out his hand. Sienna looked at his open palm and for the first time all day, decided without hesitating. She took it. He led her across the lobby without letting go of her hand. Outside, the rain had calmed into a fine drizzle that glistened on the asphalt under the streetlights. His car waited in the parking lot, as if it too had patience. She got in. He drove without saying anything important. He only remarked that the storm was beautiful from above. And Sienna laughed because a millionaire boss finding a storm beautiful was exactly the kind of detail that had made it, in other words, into the indecent letter. His apartment was in a building she had only seen from a distance. Inside, it was exactly as she'd imagined and nothing like she'd imagined. Dark wood, huge windows, very little on top of each surface. It smelled faintly of books, of some expensive soap, of a life organized by someone who didn't need to hide inside his own home. Sienna took off her shoes without thinking. He took off his jacket and let it fall over the arm of an armchair, like someone allowing himself, right there, the first lapse in years. They sat on the couch, she with her legs folded under her body, he with his sleeve rolled up to the elbow. They talked about small things, the name of the neighborhood where she'd grown up, the first time he'd traveled alone, her habit of replying "love you too" to random vendors. She laughed until she had to close her eyes. He watched her laugh with an expression she had never quite seen on anyone, a kind of quiet, contained astonishment, as if laughing out loud were a rare thing, and it was happening right there in front of him by luck. At some point after midnight, he asked in a low voice whether she wanted to leave. Sienna shook her head slowly. No joke, no excuse, no armor. He stood up. He held out his hand again. She took it again. In the hallway, he stopped in front of her, rested the palm of his hand against her face with a care that didn't match the man who bought buildings, without changing his breathing, and asked with his eyes, without needing words, whether she was sure. Sienna tilted her face against his hand. It was answer enough. The bedroom door closed behind the two of them. Chapter 6. Not apologizing for existing. Morning came in sideways through the bedroom window, in a thin autumn light that seemed hand-picked not to wake anyone before its time. The air had the warm smell of lived-in sheets and of a city still asleep a few avenues farther off. Sienna opened her eyes slowly. The shirt she was wearing wasn't hers. It smelled of the man on the other side of the door, making some kind of discreet noise in the kitchen, the noise of someone trying not to make noise, and therefore making more. Her cabinet door closing with too much care, a cup hitting the stone louder than it should, the wrong clink of a spoon. She sat on the edge of the bed, ran a hand through her messy hair, and laughed to herself. It wasn't a laugh of shame. It was something else, something quieter. Almost a thank you. The fabric of the shirt fell to mid-thigh, with that woody scent she had already begun to identify in any room, even without seeing where it came from. She walked barefoot down the hallway. The dark wood floor was cold under the soles of her feet, and each step taken in that apartment still held, for her, the sweet strangeness of someone stepping on a floor she might maybe start to call her own. Ronan stood with his back to her, in front of the stove, dark pajama pants, white t-shirt, shoulders tense in the wrong way, the way of a man who had never made coffee for another person in that apartment. "You're making coffee," she said, leaning her shoulder against the doorframe. "Trying. There's a level of trying? There is. Which one are you at?" "Survival," Sienna laughed, crossed the kitchen, and took the cup from his hand with the delicacy of someone removing a weapon from a child. The marble countertop had splashes of coffee grounds everywhere, as if the filter had been the victim of a difficult negotiation. "I'll take over from here. You're my guest. I'm your creative director. I'm creating a coffee." He watched her measure the grounds, turn on the machine and move around his kitchen as if she already had a right to it. Sienna felt the gaze on her back, warm, calm, and instead of shrinking the way she would have some time ago, she turned her face and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Nothing. You're looking. You're in my kitchen, and I'd never seen that before." It was a small sentence. Sienna pretended it meant nothing. Inside, she kept it, the way you keep a photograph no one else will ever see. They drank coffee in silence at the counter, their feet gently touching beneath the high stool. The yellow kitchen light fell over his hand holding the mug, and Sienna caught herself looking at that hand for too long. Ronan dropped her off at work 2 hours later, in the same shirt from the day before. Ren nailed it the second she crossed the hallway. You slept out. I slept. Somewhere specific. In a specific place. You're wearing yesterday's clothes. I have a spare blouse in the drawer. Sienna Vale. Ren Keller. You're dangerous. I'm caffeinated. It's the same thing. The following days went on at a new rhythm. Sienna walked into meetings without asking permission to exist. She led the team with the same mess as always, but the mess now had authority. She still dropped pens at crucial moments. She still messaged the wrong group every now and then. The difference was that she laughed first before anyone else could laugh at her. A few weeks later, Silas Aldrich, Ronan's chief of staff, known for his surgical coldness and for never saying a word more than necessary, on one of the rare occasions when he addressed someone out of pure impulse, leaned against the wall in the hallway in front of her, with his usual impassive expression. Miss Vale. Silas. Just a technical observation. Go ahead. The boss has been too human lately. He adjusted his tie with the seriousness of someone delivering a quarterly report. I'm evaluating whether I should log it as an anomaly. Log it. Noted. He tilted his head slightly and walked on without waiting for a response. Sienna stood in the hallway smiling like an idiot for an unnecessary amount of time, her hand still holding a folder she'd forgotten where she was heading to deliver. The decision to stop hiding happened with no formal notice. They simply stopped arranging separate exits. They stopped faking meetings to see each other. Pierce, now out of the company, had tried a lawsuit that he lost before the second ruling. The creative division flourished under Sienna's hand, with campaigns that for the first time carried her name loud and clear. The new Ashford & Cole logo, redesigned by her team, was approved unanimously. At the end of quarter corporate event, Sienna arrived at the Ashford & Cole lobby arm in arm with Ronan. The lobby had a sky-high ceiling, crystal chandeliers dripping golden light onto the bare shoulders of the guests, and a mixed smell of expensive perfumes and chilled champagne. The looks happened. The whispers happened. One of the senior managers spilled champagne on her own hand from being so distracted. Sienna raised her glass toward the woman in a polite greeting and walked on, feeling Ronan's arm firm against hers. Ren, from across the room, raised her own glass and mouthed without sound the word dangerous. Ronan leaned in close to her ear. His warm breath brushed a spot on Sienna's neck she still hadn't learned to control. Are you all right? I am. No joke. No joke. You're growing. Don't get used to it. He laughed low. She registered the sound, the way she'd registered so many others, and kept it. That night, they went back to his penthouse. The balcony looked out over a Boston lit with yellow windows and streets wet from the fine rain that had returned. The wind carried the damp smell of the Charles River, cold enough to raise goosebumps on the skin of Sienna's arms beneath her coat. She leaned against the railing with her glass in hand. Ronan stopped beside her, close enough for his shoulder to touch hers at a single point, and there it stayed. I still want to burn that letter, she said, after a while. You'll have to fight me for it. Why? Because it's mine now. You keep other people's embarrassing letters. I keep this one. Why? He turned his face. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her in a way that made Sienna think, right there, that there are things that don't need to be said out loud to be said. His chin had a light shadow of stubble, and his free hand drummed once on the stone of the railing before going still. Because it's the first time anyone told the truth about me without being afraid. Sienna lowered her eyes to her glass. Her throat tightened. The golden liquid trembled minimally inside the glass, and she realized, without meaning to, that it was her hand that was trembling. You're being absurd again. I am, she laughed. He leaned in. The kiss was short, with no urgency, with the comfortable calm of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. His lips were cold from the night and warm inside, and Sienna felt his breath brush against hers for a second longer before he pulled back enough to look at her again. The city glowed down below, indifferent, generous, exact. At some point between the second sip and the third silence, Sienna realized with a strange, almost funny clarity that the shame that had seemed to destroy her for years had perhaps been only the crooked door through which the truth had finally come in. The whole sentence passed through her head, all at once, and she said nothing. Some things you keep just to yourself, and maybe those were the ones that taught the most. Ronan's phone buzzed on the side table. The sound was small, but it cut through the air with a precision Sienna couldn't ignore. He glanced at the screen. Sienna couldn't read the name. She saw only that he read it, and that a shadow crossed his face for an instant, the kind she wouldn't have noticed a few months earlier. A minimal contraction in the line of his jaw, a slower blink. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine." He turned the phone face down on the table, the screen against the wood, and turned back to look at her as if that name on the screen had not just existed. "Everything really okay?" Sienna insisted, quietly. "Everything's really okay." He reached out his hand. She took it. His fingers were firm, warm, closing around hers with the same certainty as always. Boston stayed lit. Inside, in some pocket of the jacket hanging by the entrance, the phone buzzed one more time and stopped.
Hey, Rowan here. That's it for Book 1, but guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee.
Sienna thought the steamy letter forgotten on her boss's desk would be her greatest shame. She was wrong. In an old house in Vermont, she found documents hidden behind a loose wall, certificates, old letters, and a last name that turned every look, every touch, and every night in Ronan Ashford's arms into something strictly forbidden. Suddenly, the man she loved could be her blood, or worse, be her brother. Loving Ronan turned into guilt. Being near him hurt like poison. Touching him became a fear of sinning. But leaving seemed even more impossible, because some truths don't arrive to set you free. They arrive to prove how far a love can survive when desire itself becomes the greatest accusation. And now, with the ring he had kept for months still waiting in the drawer, Sienna has to decide. Flee from the only man who ever made her feel whole, or risk finding out whether what they feel is sin or salvation. And make sure no one, absolutely no one, found out this secret. But it was too late because someone had already had their eye on them for a long time and waited for the right moment to strike, where everyone would learn the scandal and it would destroy them forever.
Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and just re-uploading it to YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to get the next ones, search for My Stories by Rowan on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Rowan on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. Love, Rowan. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to Books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia Romance and Billionaire Romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a Book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.